JakeJohnstone19.com. JakeJohnstone19.com. Creativity with a passion for a purpose. To entertain, to motivate, to inspire. This is the last of the book readings of the Institute. The end of the Institute, I should say. Hell is Waiting, chapter 34. Back to the mystique I was telling y'all about. As the confrontation in South Carolina began, Felicia and her friends were sitting in slumped postures of disconsolation near the access door to the front half. The door they couldn't open because Iris was right. The lock was dead. Nikki, maybe we can still do something. Get the staff in front half the way we get. I got the red caretakers. Avery was shaking his head. He looked less like a little boy and more like a weary old man. I tried, reached out to Gladys because I hate her. Her and her fake smile. She said she wasn't listening and pushed me away. Felicia looked toward A kids who were once more wandering off, as if there were anywhere to go. A girl was doing cartwheels. A boy wearing filthy board shorts and a torn t-shirt was knocking his head lightly against the wall. Pete Littlejohn was still getting his yayas out, but they would come if called, and there was plenty of power there. She took Avery's hand, all of us together. No, Avery said, we might be able to make them feel a little weird, dizzy, and sick to their stomachs, but that's all. Kalisha, but why? Oh, why, if we could kill that bomb-making guy way over in Afghanistan, Avery, because the bomb-making guy didn't know. The preacher, that Weston guy, he doesn't know. When they know, George, they can keep us out. Avery nodded. Then what can we do? Helen asked. Anything? Avery shook his head. I don't know. There's one thing Kalisha said. We're stuck here, but we know someone who isn't. But we'll need everybody. She tilted her head toward the wondering exiles from Ward 8. Let's call them. I don't know, Shaw. Avery said, I'm pretty tired. Just this one more thing, she coaxed. Avery sighed and held out his hands. Kalisha, Nikki, George, Helen, and Katie linked up. After a moment, Iris did too. Once again, the others drifted to them. They made the capsule shape, and the hum rose in front of caretakers and Texan janitors felt it and feared it, but it wasn't directed at them. 1,400 miles away, Tim had just put a bullet between Michelle Robertson's breasts. Grant and Jones were just raising their automatic rifles to take the front of the sheriff's station. Billy Wicklow was standing on Denny Williams' hand with Sheriff John beside him. The children of the Institute called out to Luke. Chapter 35, the end of the Institute. Luke didn't think about reaching out with his mind to knock the blond man's gun up. He just did it. The Stasi lights came back, momentarily blotting out everything. When they began to fade, he saw one of the cops standing on the blond man's wrist, trying to make him let go of the gun in his hand. The blond man's lips were stretched in a snarl of pain, and blood was pouring down the side of his face, but he was holding on. The sheriff brought his foot back, apparently meaning to kick the blond man in the head again. Luke saw this much, but then, when the Stasi lights returned, brighter than ever, and the voices of his friends hit him like a hammer blow in the middle of his head, he stumbled backward through the doorway to the holding area, raising hands as if to ward off a punch, and tripped over his own feet. He landed on his butt just as Grant and Jones opened up with their automatic rifles. He saw Tim tackle Wendy and bring her to the floor, shielding her body with his own. He saw bullets tear to the sheriff and the deputy standing on the blond man's hand. They both went down. Glass flew. Somebody was screaming. Luke thought it was Wendy. Outside, Luke heard the woman who sounded weirdly like Mrs. Sigsbee about something that sounded like all of you now. For Luke, dazed from a double dose of the Stasi lights and the combined voices of his friends, the world seemed to slow down. The world seemed to slow down. He saw one of the other deputies, wounded. There was blood running down his arm, pivot toward the broken man doors, probably to see who had been shooting. He seemed to be moving very slowly. The blond man was getting to his knees, and he also seemed to be moving slowly. It was like watching an underwater ballet. He shot the deputy in the back, and then began turning toward Luke. Faster now, the world speeding up again. Before the blond man could fire, the red-headed deputy bent down, almost bowing, and shot him in the temple. The blond man flew sideways and landed on top of the woman who had claimed to be his wife. A woman outside, not the one who sounded like Mrs. Sigsbee. Another one with a southern accent shouted, "Don't you do it." More gunfire followed, and then the first woman yelled, "The boy! We have to get the boy!" "It is her," Luke thought. "I don't know how it can be, but it is. That's Mrs. Sigsbee out there." Chapter 36 of the End of the Institute. Robin Lex was a good shot, but the twilight was deepening and the distance was long for a handgun as small as the micro. Her bullet got Drummer Denton high in the shoulder. Instead of hitting him center mass, it drove him back against the board of the box office, and her next two shots went wild. Orphan Annie stood her ground. She had been raised that way in the Georgia cane breaks by a father who told her, "You don't back down, girl, not for nothing." Jean Ladeau had been a crack shot, whether drunk or sober, and he had taught her well. Now she opened fire with both the drummer's handguns, compensating for the .45 auto's heavier recoil without even thinking about it. She took down one of the automatic riflemen. It was Tony Fazale, who would never wield a zap stick again. Never minding the 3 or 4 bullets that whizzed past her, one of them giving a flirty little flick to the hem of her serape. Drummer came back and aimed at the woman who had shot him. Robin was down on one knee in the middle of the street. Kirshner sig, which had jammed. Drummer socked the .30-06 into the hollow of the shoulder that wasn't bleeding and put her down the rest of the way. "Stop shooting!" Mrs. Sigsbee was screaming. "We have to get the boy. We have to make sure of the boy." Tom Jones, Alice Green, Lewis Grant, Wait for Me, Josh Godfrey, Winona Briggs held steady. Drummer and Annie looked at each other. "Do we keep shooting or not?" Annie asked. "Fuck if I know," Drummer said. Tom Jones and Alice Green were flanking the battered doors of the sheriff's station. Josh Godfrey and Winona Briggs walked backward, likewise flanking Mrs. Sigsbee and keeping their guns on the unexpected shooters who had blindsided them. Dr. James Evans, who had not been assigned a position assigned his own. He walked past Mrs. Sigsbee. He did walk past her and approached Drummer and Orphan Annie with his hands raised and a placating smile on his face. "Get back here, you fool!" Mrs. Sigsbee snapped. He ignored her. "I'm not a part of this," he said, speaking of the fat man in the pajama top, who looked to be the saner of the two ambushers. "I never wanted to be a part of this, so I think I'll just—" "Oh, sit down," Annie said, and shot him in the foot. She was considerate enough to do it with the .38, which could cause less damage, and it did, in the theory at least. The lad left the woman in the red pantsuit, the one in charge, Mrs. Sigsbee. If the shooting started again, she would probably be cut to pieces in the crossfire, but she showed no fear, only a kind of pissed-off concentration. "I'm going into the station now," she said to Drummer and Orphan Annie. "There doesn't need to be any more of this nonsense. Stand pat and you'll be fine. Start shooting and Josh and Winona will take you out. Understood?" She didn't wait for an answer, simply turned away and walked toward the remains of her force, low heels clacking on the pavement. "Drummer," Annie said, "what do we do?" "Maybe we don't have to do anything," he said. "Look to your left. Don't move your head. Just cut your eyes." She did and saw one of the DeBera brothers hustling up the sidewalk. He had a pistol. Later he would tell the state police that although he and his brother were peaceful men, they had thought it wise to keep a gun in the store since the holdup. "Now to the right. Don't move your head." She cut. Uh, She did and saw one of the DeBera brothers hustling up the sidewalk. He had a pistol. Later he would tell the state police that although he and his brother were peaceful men, they had thought it wise to keep a gun in the store since the holdup. "Now to the right. Don't move your head." She cut her eyes that way and saw the widow Goolsby and Mr. Bilson, father of the Bilson twins. Addie Goolsby was in her robe and slippers. Richard Bilson was wearing madras shorts and a red crimson tied t-shirt. Both had hunting rifles. The cluster in front of the sheriff's station didn't see them. Their attention was on whatever business had come to her to transact. "You're in the South now." Annie had told these gunned-up interlopers she had an idea they were about to find out just how true that was. Tom and Alice, Mrs. Sigsbee said, "Go in, make sure you get the boy." They went. And this will be finished shortly in the next video. Chapter 37, the end.